But this morning, I'm going to tell you why democracy is doomed to fail. It's important to start with something that gets you motivated to longingly gaze at a high balcony window or something. But I think it's important to understand we're going to go into an election cycle soon, and it's important to understand what democracy is and why it's going to fail. I, of course, want to hear your calls, for sure. 855-472-4433. You just let me know what's on your mind. We're happy to talk about it. But let's start a little bit with democracy. Now, democracy, historically, and I'm talking like deep, multi-thousand-year history, democracy has always been considered, to use a Latin phrase, totally oogie. And the reason for that is that idiots outnumber smart people in general, and when you give everyone a vote, given that there are fewer rich people than poor people, the poor people in general vote to take away the property of the rich, and everyone ends up poor. And I think we kind of all understand that. How do you gain traction as a politician? Well, what you do is you say, see those bastards over there with the monocles and the bald cats plotting the demise of Bond? We're going to get money from those people because it's unjust that they have it. It should be yours. And the economy is seen as sort of like a zero-sum game. They're rich because you're poor. Now, that was true for a lot of human history. The marauders, the Vikings who came along and took your crop had food because you didn't. It was a zero-sum game. The economy, at least the free market, doesn't work that way. The guy who makes a great cell phone isn't stealing a cell phone from me. He's actually providing me a cell phone. But that's what you do. The rich need to pay their fair share. And this is just bribery. This is just bribery. I'm going to give you a couple of principles that are really, really important to understand by looking at economy, at democracy, at politics, and even at your own life. Okay, first of all, everybody wants something for nothing. Okay, it's true, of course, we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch, but that mirage of something for nothing is something that constantly pulls us out into the desert of statism to die and expose our bleached bones to the caustic eyes of a skeptical historian in the future. Everyone wants something for nothing. When I was, and the younger listeners will have no idea what I'm talking about, when I was a kid, when you wanted to change the channel, you had to get up. The horror. The horror. I always used to get into fights with my brother because he would be like, you have to turn the channel slowly. And I was like I was trying to crank a spark out of something. I go around really fast. So you had to get up and change the channel. But people didn't want to do that because that involves getting up, and the couch is nicer than getting up. Particularly, commercials, there was no mute, you couldn't change channels. So you get up off the couch, change the channel. Now you don't have to do that. You point and click. Okay, cell phone has an IR blaster in it, which is tragically underpowered for microwaving my coffee, I found. So people want something for nothing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Hey, that's great. I think that's fantastic. That's why we're not in the caves. I want something for nothing is wonderful. I want my food to be chilled without having to have some Disney character bring me ice from the high mountains. Great. Something for nothing. In a free market, wanting something for nothing is a beautiful thing. I want knowledge without having to drive down to the library. I want videos without having to drive to the video store. I want something, quote, for nothing. I want to expend less effort to get more reward. It's why we domesticated animals. It's why we built the internal combustion engine. It's why there are giant farm machineries that look like they should be carrying droids on Tatooine. It's wonderful. We should have that. Now, in the free market, our desire and our drive to get something for nothing is really the root of economic progress. It's why we automate. It's why things are more efficient. It's why you have a credit card rather than having to borrow from the guy next in line to you and promise to pay him back. So our desire to get more return for less effort in the free market drives innovation, drives efficiency, drives customer satisfaction. In the statist society, in a democracy, quite the opposite occurs. When you marry, oh, and what an unholy marriage it is, when you marry our desire to get something for nothing with bottomless political power, particularly the power to create money out of thin air, which is really not to create money at all, the capacity to counterfeit combined with the voters' desire to get something for nothing creates the mutant tumor-based economy that we're currently struggling to recognize and communicate as dangerous to others. Everybody wants something for nothing. And a politician can promise you something for nothing. They can promise you a program that you don't have to pay for because the future will pay for it, the rich will pay for it, the unborn will pay for it, debt will pay for it. You can get something for nothing in a statist society. And that hooks into people's drive for that. And it's inescapable. All animals want to expend less effort to gain more resources. It's a driving factor in biological evolution. It's a driving factor in human progress. And it is a Darwinian set of bony finger knuckles around the throat of the economy when you have a government at the center of society. It hooks into people's desire for something for nothing. And instead of harnessing that for economic productivity, for growth, for efficiency, for entertainment, which would occur in a voluntary society, instead, we get the slow strangulation of economic opportunity through the constant redirection and theft and debt of resources to bribe people with the illusion that they're getting something for nothing. Ooh, do you want to satisfy your bloodlust and go get Saddam Hussein? Great. We can do that, and the only thing that'll happen is in 6 or 7 years you won't have a house anymore, which we will then blame everyone else for, except you. Losing your house for most people is the price of the bloodlust, right? Because they went to America goes to war, doesn't raise taxes. How do they pay for it? Fiat currency. When you want something for nothing, and the state is providing for it, you will pay more than you ever dreamed of. We're going to be right back with the second principle of the failures of democracy right after the break. And we are talking about challenges in democracy. Or, I guess the technical phrase would be our current seppuku spasm called democracide, wherein we eat the future to bribe the greedy in the present. Through debt, through counterfeiting, through taxing the successful. So the first principle we talked about is everybody wants something for nothing. All life forms evolve, adapt, are driven by the goal of expending fewer resources to gain more resources, expending less energy to gain more stuff. You like a remote control, you don't want to get off the couch. So that's the first principle. And in the free market, it's great. When you have voters and a government that controls the economy, it's terrible. So the first principle. Second principle, everyone wants to escape the consequences of bad decisions. Everyone wants to escape the consequences of bad decisions. That's natural. I mean, years ago, I guess in my teens, I spent a couple of years working as a teacher's aide in a daycare. And we had like 30 kids in the room, ages 5 to 10. It was great, wild fun. And I spent summers there full time. And I mean, I really love kids, so it was a really great job. But the one thing you can't help but notice is anytime there's a crash and a problem and something falls over or something breaks, when you look over, you see this ringed phalanx of fingers pointing all at each other saying, he made me do it, she did it, it wasn't my fault, she started it, he started it. That's natural. That's, you know, mistakes are made, you make mistakes, and you want to avoid the consequences of those mistakes. And that's natural. And again, in a free market, sometimes you will and sometimes you won't. You know, if you're a lifelong smoker and you get lung cancer, you want someone, young, healthy person on a motorcycle to cream themselves through an ice cream truck so that you can get some fresh, pulpy, spongy, healthy young lungs. Right? But you don't have the right to go out with a rusty spoon and get them yourself, right? So we all want to avoid the consequences of bad decisions. Women who have unprotected sex with the wrong guy, well, they want to avoid the negative consequences of those bad decisions. And what they used to do in the past was they give the kids up for adoption before the welfare state, right, before the Great Society. They would give those kids up for adoption, and those kids would do pretty well. They would do actually as well as kids who were born biologically to the parents. Now, women want to avoid the consequences of those bad decisions, as do men. And so there's a welfare state, and the welfare state is basically the single mother state. Most of the growth of the welfare state is the growth of single parenthood, single motherhood. So they want to avoid the consequences of those bad decisions. And so they want to turn children who are a massive economic loss, a joy and a delight, but a massive economic loss. They want to turn the loss of children into the profit of children. And they do that through the state. They do that through voting, through portraying themselves as heroic self-sacrificers when all they did was have sex with a guy that was unprotected. Not exactly heroism, irresponsibility. And so everybody wants to avoid the consequences of bad decisions. If you didn't take out health insurance because you're young and healthy and you get struck with some god-awful disease, then you want it to be like you took out health insurance. Oops, kind of made a big mistake there. I'm young, I got cancer, don't have health insurance. That's bad. I get it. So then you're going to lobby politicians to say, well, you can't deny people for pre-existing conditions, which is really the whole point of insurance. You can't buy fire insurance when your house is currently on fire. Otherwise, there would be no such thing as fire insurance, and the idea that you can only apply for healthcare insurance after you're ill is completely mental. It's a complete... But of course, people who don't choose to buy health insurance who then get sick, of course they want other people to pay for that bad decision. Or something which turned out to be a bad decision. You roll the dice, right? And we've kind of lost the constitutionality which we used to have as a species. And particularly in the sort of Western European culture. We used to be more comfortable with allowing people to serve as a warning to others. There's a great demotivational poster of a tanker going down, a super tanker going down. And underneath it says, it could be that the sole purpose of your life is to serve as a warning to others, right? So if someone who's 25 doesn't have health insurance and gets sick, and then has a very difficult life because of that and ends up being years and years in debt, then that story goes around and people look at that person and say, well, I guess I'd better get some health insurance because I look at that disaster, right? A woman who gets pregnant with an irresponsible guy's kid, he runs off. Well, then in a non-state society, she goes and lives with her parents, and she has a very difficult life, and she has trouble acquiring skills, and no sane or quality man is going to want to have anything to do with her because she's got some other idiot's kid floating around, and he might as well go with someone who doesn't have that massive overhead from a biological and resource and monetary standpoint. And so people look at that and say, oh, yeah, you remember Sally? Yeah. She had sex with the quarterback who then ran off to Chile to go pick grapes. And then she ended up moving back into her parents' basement. She never got anywhere. She never did anything with her life, and she's unhappy and all that. So maybe birth control or abstinence is a fine idea, right? But we've kind of got out of the habit of allowing people to fail to the point where they serve as warnings to others. And I understand that. The people who fail have a huge and desperate desire to get resources no matter what. This is particularly true when people have kids. I can go hungry. My daughter cannot go hungry, right? I can choose to live in some crappy place, but my daughter shouldn't have that choice imposed on her. So particularly when, face it, it's mostly single moms. When women have kids, if they don't have money and the kid is sick, they just need resources. If they don't have money and the kid is hungry, they just need resources. And they really don't care how they get them. So they'll organize, they'll apply on the natural male tendency to rush to the aid of women. And they'll vote. They want to escape the consequences of bad decisions. And so now we don't have as many warning signs on the road. Slippery road ahead, ice storm, dragons, chasms, volcanoes, geysers of fire and acid. Don't drive that way. We don't have those as much anymore. And so people who avoid the consequences of bad decisions are fertile ground for growing new bad decisions. There are high school girls in America who make pacts with each other to get pregnant, go on welfare, and all raise their children in some slovenly coven of irresponsibility. This was kind of unheard of in the past, when if you got a girl pregnant, you kind of married her, right? And if you didn't, then she would go away. Nobody would ever talk about it. The baby would be given up for adoption and have a much better life thereby. But now women hang on to their kids largely because they're a profit center rather than a loss center. And as a result, because enough people are making bad decisions, they represent a significant voting bloc, a significant cultural bloc, and they are warping the entire culture. And now if you blame anybody for making bad decisions, you are intolerant, you're a prude, you're a Victorian, you're uptight man. And so the ethics of society, which used to be how these things were enforced, the disapproval of society, the ostracism of society, how these rules used to be enforced, have all gone the way of the dodo. And thus we have an ever-increasing state. We're going to talk about the last principle on the foundation of the death of democracy right after the break. We are talking about democracide, the rampant failures of mob rule, mass vote, self-interested, drive the Thelma and Louise car straight off the cliff in a ball of fiery fiat death principles. First was everyone wants something for nothing, which is great in the free market, terrible in a state society where people get to vote other people's money away. Everybody wants to escape the consequences of bad decisions. Didn't buy health insurance and got sick? Well, go to the politician and tell them that it's discriminatory if you can't buy health insurance if you're already sick. I can't wait to have in my will that after I'm dead, I really want life insurance. That's going to be great. I would imagine that the first premium will be a lot higher than what they'll pay out because, insurance companies need to eat too. But here's the most important one that's the most subtle. When I was growing up, I used to live in Don Mills in Toronto when I was growing up. And it was a broke neighborhood, single mom farms and all that kind of stuff. But there were those of us who really wanted to get out. Oh, I was like a ferret in an overturned aquarium. Scrabble, scrabble, scrabble. I gotta get out. I gotta get out. I can't live like this. And so I did. I got out. And a friend of mine had two sisters. Now, one of those sisters was like seriously hardworking. She was on the volleyball team. She had a job. She was conscientious. She did her homework. She was a really good girl. And her sister was not that way inclined. She would stay out all night. She would party. She was one of the 30% of Americans who can proudly say that in the past year they've not read a single book. And, she was into makeup and shallow stuff and flirting and all that kind of stuff. She milked her memories, I guess you could say. And this really didn't seem to change. Now, years later, for reasons doesn't really matter, I ran into them again. And this girl had gotten her accounting degree, the good girl, and she was still taking courses, and she was hardworking. And, she got up early, she went on business trips, she did all the stuff that is tough. And she faced her fears, which everybody does. Usually when you go into business from a low-rent neighborhood, you get a bit of frauditis, which is like, well, these people all know that I come from a terrible welfare-based single-mom household, right? These rich people are going to know, and you get over that, right? So she faced all those fears, she worked hard, she did a good job, and as a result, her income was like going north. Seriously north. Like she was close to six figures. In her I think she was 26 or 27 when I saw her again. Now, her sister had continued the party girl lifestyle and had dabbled in various mind-altering substances, not just television, and like stuff that if you say achoo over it, you've just lost a lot of money. And she had continued all of this. party girl lifestyle. She hadn't added one dime to her human capital. She hadn't learned any skills. She was just basically milking her looks and being taken out by guys. And, sooner or later, I'm sure, would end up pregnant. And the really important thing to understand is that the good girl, who was making a lot of money, had worked really hard and done what I would consider responsible, maybe even virtuous and good stuff with her life, good things with her life. Whereas the party girl had had a lot of fun. And let's not kid ourselves. That stuff is fun. When it beats, studying for an accountancy degree versus going to a rave, if you've only got one day to live, you ain't cracking the book on double entry bookkeeping, right? You're going to go to the rave. Like the guys who went backpacking through the world for 2 years while I was learning how to start a business, right? Working my 70 hours a week and so on. I'd get emails from those guys. Here's a picture of me studying a ruin, looking thoughtful. And here's the hot Australian girl I'm traveling with. And I was like, ooh, it burns. It burns. I have to go back and see if my code will compile for the 1200th time that day. So they had a lot of fun. The people who traveled, the people who partied, they had a great amount of fun. And you know what the terrible thing is in democracy, the terrible thing is in our modern system? You can tax money, but you can't tax fun. This is a very profound thing to understand. The sister who worked hard made $100,000 a year. That can be taxed, right? The fruits of her hard work and conscientiousness, that can be taxed. All the fun her sister had, that can't be taxed. You can't swap that out. Irresponsibility leaves nothing but fun memories. Responsibility leaves income that can be redistributed. You can't redistribute fun, you can redistribute money. This is a very fundamental thing to understand about democracy. Because when the fun sister gets into her late 20s or early 30s or whatever, when her looks begin to go and men begin to look for younger women, it's just the inevitable hitting the wall thing that happens to women, particularly women who've lived the hard party life and not gone to a whole bunch of yoga and aerobics and so on. They hit the wall. They age, their eggs begin to revolt and die within their bodies, and all the shallow party guys, the players, the alphas, they all start looking for fresh meat, for the younger model, the newer model. Well, she's going to have a pretty terrible life then. She's not developed emotional skills, she's not developed intellectual skills, she's not developed literary skills, she's not developed economically valuable or marketable skills of any kind. So what's she going to want? Subsidies, baby! Give me some rent control! Pay for me to go to school! I want stuff! All I had was fun! Now I just want stuff! Don't make me work for stuff! That's what squares do! That's what my sister did! The little bookworm, the librarian, no fun, square, Victorian prude. I had fun! And it's like, yeah, you had fun. And now you pay for it. Your sister didn't have fun, unless she loves accounting, in which case, I don't know what her definition of fun is. Your sister didn't have fun, so now she gets the money. You had fun, so you don't get the money. But in a democracy, you can vote to take away the products of virtue. But you can never vote to take away the products of vice, of laziness, of indolence. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing. If the party girl wants to go and have fun, more power to her. Go have fun. As the ancient Greeks used to say, take what you want, then pay for it. Now, we've got all the take what you want, and in democracy, nobody wants to pay for it, and when politicians can create money and borrow and pass laws that few people can figure out the cause of, you never really have to pay for it, because you can get the politicians to pay for it instead. You can't ever redistribute fun, indolence. If you want to watch reality television rather than study for your accountancy degree, if you want to eat Doritos rather than go to the gym, if you want to have unprotected sex rather than triple bagging Mr. Magic Johnson, then you take what you want and you pay for it. It's the same thing with health. Between 70 and 90% of health problems are lifestyle related, which is a nice way of saying you did it to yourself. Now, if you choose to go to the gym and eat well, you are much more likely to be healthy. Which means you can still work hard, which means you can be taxed. The people who eat Doritos and chocolate and sit on the couch picking belly lint out of their belly buttons and watching reality television, those people are much more likely to get sick. And when they get sick, they run to the politicians and say, "Go get me that guy's stuff. I'm sick. It's genetic." No. The fact that your butt had Velcro and the couch had the other half of the Velcro is not genetics. That's a choice. But they can run to the politicians and say, "Go get me money. I'm sick." And they can go and take all the money from the people who ate well and went to the gym. But the people who ate well and went to the gym, and trust me, I work out 3 times a week. It's not really a lot of fun. It's just not. I've been doing it since I was 16. It's just not a huge amount of fun. If you eat well and you go to the gym, then all of the excess value that you can have can be taxed. If you're lazy and get fat and get sick, you can go and get the government to take away the money from the healthy people. But the healthy people can't say to the politician, "Listen, you get me all the fun and you get me all the taste of Doritos and chocolate that I denied myself for those years. I will exchange $50,000 to pay for that guy's health care as long as you can go and get me all the fun he had watching reality TV and eating potato chips with 9 pounds of dip every day." But you can only get and tax and redistribute the fruits of virtue. You cannot tax and redirect the fruits of vice, of laziness. That imbalance is one of the major causes of the slow democracy of our society. I worked very hard in my 20s and my 30s. I went to school, I denied myself income, I read countless books, struggled my way through the socialist hellscape known as Canadian academia, started a business, worked 70, 80 hours a week, overcome all of the insecurities I had about coming from a poor place and selling to multimillionaires, worked really hard at all that stuff. So now I can have the living crap taxed out of me, and that money can be redistributed to people who had a lot more fun in their 20s and 30s than I did. I can't get their fun. Their fun is locked in their guilt-ridden memories. I can't get their fun. Can't go to the politician and say, "Okay, yeah, tax me, but tax his fun and give that to me." And this is why the successful will always suffer and the indolent will always thrive until democracy eats itself. Considered, to use a Latin phrase, totally oogie. And the reason for that is that idiots outnumber smart people in general. And when you give everyone a vote, given that there are fewer rich people than poor people, the poor people in general vote to take away the property of the rich, and everyone ends up poor. And I think we kind of all understand that. How do you gain traction as a politician? Well, what you do is you say, "See those bastards over there with the monocles and the bald cats plotting the demise of Bond?" That are really, really important to understand by looking at economy, at democracy, at politics, and even at your own life. Okay, first of all, everybody wants something for nothing. Okay, it's true, of course we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch, but that mirage of something for nothing is something that constantly pulls us out into the desert of statism to die and expose our bleached bones to the caustic eyes of a skeptical historian in the future. Everyone wants something for nothing. When I was, and the younger listeners will have no idea what I'm talking about, when I was a kid, when you wanted to change the channel, you had to get up. The horror. The horror. I always used to get into fights with my brother. We're going to get money from those people because it's unjust that they have it. It should be yours. And the economy is seen as sort of like a zero-sum game. They're rich because you're poor. Now, that was true for a lot of human history. The marauders, the Vikings who came along and took your crop had food because you didn't. It was a zero-sum game. The economy, at least the free market, doesn't work that way. The guy who makes a great cell phone isn't stealing a cell phone from me. He's actually providing me a cell phone. But that's what you do. The rich need to pay their fair share. And this is just bribery. This is just bribery. I'm going to give you a couple of principles. But this morning, I'm going to tell you why democracy is doomed to fail. It's important to start with something that gets you motivated to longingly gaze at a high balcony window or something. But I think it's important to understand. We're going to go into an election cycle soon, and it's important to understand what democracy is and why it's going to fail. I, of course, want to hear your calls, for sure. 855-472-4433. You just let me know what's on your mind. We're happy to talk about it. But let's start a little bit with democracy. Now, democracy, historically, and I'm talking like deep multi-thousand-year history, democracy has always been, because he would be like, you have to turn the channel slowly. And I was I was trying to crank a spark out of something. I go around really fast. So you had to get up and change the channel. But people didn't want to do that because that involves getting up, and the couch is nicer than getting up. Particularly, commercials, there was no mute, you couldn't change channels. So you get up off the couch, change the channel. Now you don't have to do that. You point and click. Okay, cell phone has an IR blaster in it, which is tragically underpowered for microwaving my coffee, I found. So people want something for nothing. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. I think that's fantastic. That's why we're not in the caves. I want something for nothing is wonderful. I want my food to be chilled without having to have some